Welcome back to Extra Literary Affairs. Today, Jennifer and I are going to be discussing Don't Look Now by Daphne du Maurier, who we have yet to discuss, but I've read a few of her novels now and some of her short stories, and I'm a fan of hers. For anyone who doesn't know who Daphne du Maurier is, she is known as a master of psychological suspense who has famous novels like Rebecca, which was made into a Netflix adaptation relatively recently, and books like Jamaica Inn, which is an excellent novel. There was also an adaptation of one of my other favorite novels by her, which is My Cousin Rachel, which had Rachel Weisz in it, and she's a fabulous actress. The movie's not as good as the book, but I would read the book. Anyway, that's not why we're here. She helped redefine Gothic fiction and inspire generations of writers and filmmakers. Like Alfred Hitchcock, her atmospheric storytelling and complex characters left a lasting mark on 20th century literature. She was born May 13th in 1907 in London, England, and she died in 1989 in Cornwall, England. So she lived longer than I thought. I don't know why I thought she died around maybe the 70s. She was a novelist, a playwright, and a biographer. And as I said, her most notable works, I named a few, But the Birds, which is an Alfred Hitchcock movie. If you didn't know, that's an adaptation of her short story. She emerged from a theatrical and literary family. Her father was an actor-manager, Sir Gerald du Maurier. What a fancy name. And her grandfather was the novelist George du Maurier, who I have not read. She published her first novel, The Loving Spirit, in 1939, but it was Rebecca in 1938 that catapulted her into international fame. The novel won the U.S. National Book Award and was adapted into an Oscar-winning film by Alfred Hitchcock, which I didn't know that was also another adaptation. I didn't know he did two du Maurier ones, but okay. We're all going to learn something new today. Her literary impact was for genre innovation because she blurred the lines between romance, thriller, and Gothic fiction, often weaving psychological tension and supernatural elements into her plots. She very much reminds me of the Brontes, specifically Charlotte Bronte. Her writing reminds me of Jane Eyre. She has some Cornish influence. Her deep connection to Cornwall shaped the haunting settings of many of her novels, adding a layer of mystique and isolation that became her signature. We just talked about how isolation tropes are really helpful in horror last week. And her legacy, though initially dismissed by critics as a romance novelist, du Maurier's work is now celebrated for its narrative complexity, emotional depth, and enduring appeal. She was made a Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire in 1969. Her stories continue to captivate readers and viewers alike, proving that suspense, mystery, and emotional nuance never go out of style. Now that we know who Daphne du Maurier is, in case you did not know, most people have probably heard of The Birds.
Yeah, I did not know, Joey. The Birds was definitely influential in my childhood. Thanks a lot for writing that story and for making this beautiful adaptation by Alfred Hitchcock. Scary stuff.
Yeah, excellent movie. A little hard to believe now. It was great for the moment when it came out, but it doesn't hold up as well for the fear factor, at least.
Joey, and speaking of fear factor, we are in our spooky season, right? So Don't Look Now was the perfect choice for just continuing that spooky isolation, supernatural weirdness we have going on.
Yeah, and we're tracing horror, and not from its origins, but we started with W.W. Jacobs, which is earlier in the 20th century, and now we're going to Daphne du Maurier, which is a little bit later. We're still in the early to mid 20th century. To see how horror develops and evolves and how our fears change and how sometimes they just stay the same. Some things are just scary forever. So now we know who she is. We're acquainted with her. So Jennifer, tell us why you wanted us to read this story, because you obviously picked this one for us to read, and your initial impressions.
I heard about the story very recently through another source that was investigating Gothic horror. And I thought, oh, this is a great story. It really compelled me right from the start. I'm like, wait, when was this written? Maybe mid-century, near 1950s, somewhere in that area. And I just thought it was a really compelling story. I did not see the ending coming. I was completely taken up in the story, the plotting of the story. I was like, well, then what's going to happen? Then what's going to happen? We talked last week of the narrative suspense and how you don't necessarily, in the literary horror that we've been reading, it's not necessarily beautifully written from the standpoint of these big flowery phrases, but it's more the anticipation of dread or of loneliness or of confusion of, wait a minute, that didn't happen. It's like, oh yeah, that happened. So that is one of the reasons why I wanted you to read this story with me, because I thought that there are just so many levels that we could investigate this story a little bit further. But I will acknowledge, Joey, I was really excited to read the story with you, but I also flagged it in my head. I'm like, Joey might have some difficulty with some of the antiquated language and ideas about people and the way that they are portrayed in the story. So I'm looking forward to talking to you a little bit further about that. But my initial impression is this was a great story and it fit very nicely into the continuation of the development of the horror genre. Is this Frankenstein, Mary Shelley? No, no, it is not. But it is definitely something that was a little spooky and creepy, and I did not see the ending coming, which was always something that I enjoy. How about you, Joey?
Yeah, that ending is something else. Okay. As I said, I'm a fan of Daphne du Maurier, so I was actually disappointed in this story because I felt like it was too long for my reading sensibility. I have a physical copy of her collection, some of her short stories, and it was about like 50 pages long. So it kind of felt like it dragged for me. The pacing felt very off. There wasn't enough tension being kept up. There was a lot of lulls as we were exploring some of the things with John and Laura. So for me, it felt a little like this could have been edited down a little bit. And as you said, I felt like there was some not so great depictions of people in this story that I do want to address because I think it's important. Even if we're going to read these things and discuss them, because we've talked about this with Flannery O'Connor, where these authors are great authors and they do add to the literary canon and they are worthy of scholarship and discourse. But it is important to acknowledge that times have changed and attitudes have changed, and we can be more sensitive readers, but still appreciate other things. And if you are triggered by any of those things, then you don't have to read it. You can read some of her other works that don't really mention those things, that I have come across at least, because she is a good writer. Rebecca is her most notable work, and it does hold up. It's still good. But what I really thought this story was going to be about was, and it really is, I mean, at the heart of it, I think I got distracted by the stuff that it was less savory for me. The heart of it is talking about grief and what it's like for John and Laura who have lost their daughter, and there is a risk of losing their son. His health declines briefly in the story. And so I really enjoyed that exploration in this story. How do people deal with grief? What are the reactions around them? Because there are some things that I would also like to talk about, which I'm sure you flagged too. The doctor's reaction to when they lose their daughter. I was like, you're kidding me. That's disgusting. And I believe that this happened. Okay. I mean, it's not based on a true story, but I believe that could have come out of someone's mouth at the time. But anyway, we will get into those things, I'm sure, because I definitely want to talk about the ending because I was like, no, Daphne du Maurier. If I knew she had a middle name, I would use it. Like, what are you
Joey was
doing
not
here?
having it. He was
Yeah,
not having it.
I wasn't it.
Wait, one of the things that I really appreciated about this story is it starts out with the phrase, "Don't look now." And that is the title of the story. So, what is this actually about? And it's this very playful scene in the beginning that they're observing another couple in a restaurant. They revert back to some of their younger ways in which they were interacting with each other. And it was very fun and very playful. I was like, don't look over there, Joey. But like, there is a couple and they are really a lot. And they kind of were doing this fun thing. And that husband was like, oh, yay, my wife is back. Like, maybe this paralyzing grief that she has been suffocated under, maybe that's starting to lift. Okay, don't do anything to ruin it. And he's like, oh, this is going to be fantastic. First, I had some questions like, what tragedy did befall them? What is going to happen? What's up with this other couple? Because they were very ambiguous. And then it immediately goes to a scene where she comes back from an encounter she had with one of the members of the other two parties. It was a twin sisters. Were they twins, Joey?
Yeah, they say they're twins.
Okay, because I'm all about the twins because they are mysterious and thought-provoking to me in all of the ways. They really are,
I'll take that as a compliment.
with, like, ESP and that sort of thing. Twins can communicate is my feeling. But back to the story. So we are set on this, like, really fun, "Don't look now, don't look at other people, don't make judgments," and she's like, "Okay, husband, don't point, don't be rude," and she's like, "Oh, I'll just wrap my napkin and casually look to the side and be like, 'Oh, yeah, I totally saw them.'" And so it was very interesting. It roped me in with the observational capabilities and the way in which Daphne du Maurier was writing the story. Okay, I see you. I see what you're doing here, and this is going to be really fun. It then took a turn. And there was, for me, a lot of sexism and a lot of the husband being stereotypical. I was annoyed, Joy. I love reading stories that annoy me, as you know. And they said, well, how did we not see the twin sisters come in. How did we not notice them? I was like, oh, well, they were by a bunch of Americans and they were so distracting. So this is a British point of view about people traveling in Venice. And I think as an American, I am a little sensitive to people pointing out at times, perhaps as a generalization, Americans sometimes stick out in Europe because we may not know the social norm or we may not care.
It's probably
But
both.
it happens. Wait, you guys, don't be picking on us. It wasn't a story about that, but that immediately pricked my attention. Oh, if you're pointing out the Americans, you're probably not Americans. And it turns out that they're very British. And as you were reading her intro about her upbringing and where she came from, it very much makes sense that she probably had a very clear idea of some hierarchies in British society that also come out in her story. So, Joey, what jumped out at you, or what was something that was enticing about why should we even continue to read this story?
I don't know that I have a reason, but someone should read this story. But I think if you want to be a completionist for Daphne du Maurier, you should read it. I think there is merit to this story. I like the idea of the title being Don't Look Now, and that's our first mention. Because we've talked about this in stories before where so often the title of the story comes into play somehow, and it's immediately mentioned. And so we sort of get this tongue-in-cheek kind of thing that's immediately relatable, like you were just saying, that we've all had that moment where we're like, oh my God, don't look now. Okay. And then, of course, the person you said to inevitably looks, and it is extremely obvious. And you're like, oh my goodness, you are messing up here. And I like that sentiment Pete because John has premonitions. And so we again have this thing like, don't look now. And the meaning sort of changes. In this way, it reminds me of The Frolic by Thomas Ligotti because we have this manipulation of a phrase. In this case, it was a phrase. In that case, it was a word. But there's a manipulation of how does it get used in different contexts. I think it's really interesting when authors do that kind of thing with language that we have to reevaluate. Like, what does it mean to tell someone don't look now? What does it mean when you say that to yourself? Because at first it's to gawk at these women. And then later in the story, it's sort of like, oh my goodness, that can't be real. My wife should not be returning back into Venice. She should be going off to London. So I forgot we did not give a synopsis of the story.
Well, we're doing that kind of on the fly because the reason I don't want to give out all the spoilers of the story is that I would love for people to discover it. But I know you and I well enough, Joey, that we're going to have to get to all the spoilers. So
Yeah,
the playfulness of her using Don't Look Now, as you said, it's like, don't physically turn your head and look at somebody and gawk at someone else. Super rude, not cool. Please don't do that. The second one is, as you said, the premonition, like, don't look into the future. Don't see what the future holds for you. The other thought that also was so interesting, the author was so nuanced and you could take it anywhere you want. Don't look into yourself. Don't look into your grief. Don't look into what might be reality for someone else. Those sisters, one sister was a doctor. Again, we have these doctor authority figures, and her sister has a disability. She has lost her physical ability to see, but that has given her, as you would say, it's not prophecy. It gave her something more like a medium. She can see spirits. She can have communications with people who are not physically present. And so it's like, well, don't look at that. And then I had a flash just as you were saying, don't look now. My parents would say, don't look now because trouble's coming. Don't get too comfortable because you just do not know what is down the pike for you. And that comes true for me at the extreme last scene. There was no reason any of that needed to happen. And I was like, oh, of course that had to be his outcome. Of course that had to happen to him.
had he not seen this person jumping across the little gondolas in Venice, he would not have gone after them and he would not have met his demise. But I want to just go back briefly to these twin sisters.
They're in their 60s, right, Joey? So they're not young people. They are depicted as being elderly sisters in their mid 60s.
Yeah. So I'm just going to read from the text here. And this is the first sights that John and Laura have of the sisters. Pretend to choke, he said. Then they won't notice. You know what it is. They're criminals doing the sights of Europe, changing sex at every stop. Twin sisters here on Torcello. Twin brothers tomorrow in Venice, or even tonight, parading arm in arm across the Piazza San Marco. Just a matter of switching clothes and wigs. And then a little bit down the page, he says, depends on what is revealed, John answered. If she's hermaphrodite, make a bolt for it. She might have a hypodermic syringe concealed and want to knock you out before you reach the door. Not great, John. Don't like your attitude. Okay. So what I asked myself as I'm reading this is because I don't want to assume that the author is inputting something of themselves in the story. I don't know Du Maurier's personal views on gender and all of those things. There was not a lot of language at this point. There's no way she would have been able to articulate, most likely, the gender spectrum and all of this kind of stuff. So I have to not read anachronistically, which is hard to do. And we talk about this a lot. Sometimes it's fun. I'm going to do it anyway. But sometimes you're like, am I hindering my own reading experience by thinking of this anachronistically? So I was trying to decipher what is the purpose of putting these women in here anachronistically. What does it mean for women who do not present as stereotypically feminine? Why does that take away from their womanhood if they identify as women? And in this story, it seems they do. Again, Daphne du Maurier would not put some like non-binary character in here. I highly doubt it. So it's most likely not that. I don't think she's making a statement on gender. So I was trying to think, well, what mythological sort of inspiration could she be taking? This is similar in Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart, where we have this older person. She's not old, but she's older than the couple here who's blind. She's obviously blind. He can tell that she is blind. So we have this idea of this all-seeing eye. And in case she's blind to both eyes. And it's very similar to the Telltale Heart, where we have this man with a blinded eye. We're tracing that back to Norse mythology, and then we trace it back even further back. So we have a tradition of people who lose their sense of sight, but gain something else. They gain a type of knowledge, an ethereal knowledge that they wouldn't have had previously. In this case, this woman says that she can see spirits, she can see the dead and communicate with them. So to me, when you talk about someone that is very androgynous, it feels almost mythological, not as in androgynous people don't exist, but I feel like it sort of says that you cannot be defined in any way. So you're sort of in both sides of reality where you can assume different gender identities, but you can also be with the living and the dead. That's sort of where I landed. I could be just grasping at straws and trying to make it okay for myself, but that's where my head was going. I think she's trying to give this woman some ambiguity and androgyny so that it feels a little bit more believable that she is able to just very nonchalantly go in between these realms of existence.
Joey, that is a very generous interpretation of that. I do appreciate that being ambiguous because there was one phrase that came up when John was explaining who he thought this woman was. Is that strong women who are quick to light a cigarette with a cigarette lighter put men like him who are slow-witted with their box of matches to shame. And sometimes these women even have husbands that go to the golf club. And so for me, it was this whole concept that you had to explain to me many, many moons ago of people being in marital relationships where either or both of them are not able to live in a society where their gender identity and their sexual preferences are honored. So they are in these situations where they can quote unquote pass for straight back in the Stone Age, right? When things were not as progressive as they are today. So I thought that was also very interesting because when you had mentioned, what do we know about Daphne du Maurier and her ideas about gender, about sex, about power, about personal choice, expression? There's a lot of interesting things that I felt from my perspective were progressive concepts. And when you and I were talking about it, you're like, this does not seem progressive. This seems very damaging, right? Like perpetuating some stereotypes and using some language that would not be acceptable at all today. So I appreciate that you said if you can set that aside and look at the story as a whole, there are definitely some things going on there. Because one of the things that popped up to me when they said that he immediately dismisses that this woman who is blind has some sort of supernatural ESP ability, can communicate with the dead. And he's like, wife, I hate to break the news to you here. You are such a sucker. Don't do it. And then the tables get turned because they were like, excuse me, John, we also can tell that you have second sight, but you're too stubborn and too closed off to actually see it. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Because they're asking him to tap into what is portrayed in this story as a feminine gift, right? It is a female who has this. And he's like, yeah, I don't have that. That's bold. And then he's like, wait a minute. I saw my wife, who I know is not here, on a ferry heading in the wrong direction. What in the world is going on here? And that leads him down this whole rabbit hole that ends up getting him actually in trouble. And it was like, huh, what was that all about? And I loved the plot twist and the if you're not willing to acknowledge your truth, then what are the consequences? Or then is it wishful thinking? Why did it remind him of his daughter? Why was it jumping around like a little goblin-y creature? It was not moving in a straightforward path, so it felt otherworldly. And I don't think he needed to die for it. That seemed really unexpected. Like nobody
Yeah.
other than John was surprised more about that ending than me because that was completely unnecessary.
Yeah, I didn't like the ending. I have to say, I think it was a little much. I can't excuse Daphne du Maurier. It's literally just it's a product of its time at this point, and I think you either have to accept that that is a feature of this story, or maybe it's just not for you, and that's okay. Like I said, she has other great works like Jamaica Inn, a fantastic book. It's great. It explores women's empowerment and sexual expression in women, especially like a slightly older woman than like the very early 20s. That is so often depicted. And so I really like that story. But anyway, we're not talking about that. We're talking about this.
So you're telling me, Joey, just so I am really clear, do not dismiss her work entirely because the problematic elements that are in this story are not represented in her other works. Give her another chance to explore the full experience of her writing.
I haven't read the breadth of all of her work, her entire oeuvre, but I would certainly say that I don't remember any of this coming up. I would have been like, that's weird. Maybe she's not for me. But I do want to read the ending. This is what it says. The child struggled to her feet and stood before him, the pixie hood falling from her head onto the floor. He stared at her, incredulity turning to horror, to fear. It was not a child at all, but a little thick-set woman dwarf, about 3 feet high, with a great square adult head too big for her body, gray locks hanging shoulder length, and she wasn't sobbing anymore. She was grinning at him, nodding her head up and down. And then one of the last lines was, the creature was gibbering in its corner. So, no, Daphne du Maurier, no. That's bad. That's very bad. You don't talk about people like that because she's obviously not trying to describe an actual Tolkien level dwarf, this mythological creature that lives in mines and does all that. She's talking about an actual woman who has dwarfism, who is a little person. And so this to me, I was like, why? Why is this our ending? This is not right. I mean, I get product of its time, but was this necessary? Because of course, this is extremely offensive. She's talking about a human adult woman who is more bestial than human, and it's not good.
So, Joey, I read that completely differently. So I saw this as a shape-shifting character because when he first hears the cry of this child, he's kind of like, not my problem, nothing for me to do. Then he hears the cry again and he was like, okay, I can't ignore that someone is in distress. So I took this as one more element of the supernatural, that this was a goblin, this was a witch, this was a supernatural force that shapeshifts. You're missing your daughter, you're a dad, you're going to come if you hear a little kid crying. So I'm going to make the sound of a little kid. And then you come, and then I change into something that is described in a horrific manner. It is not that that is horrific in itself. It is described horrifically. And then he gets murdered by this being. And for me, I honestly never thought, because it was like jumping in a nonsensical way, in a non-physically human way. It felt like there was more agility than a child. It's a small person, but it's making these big leaps on floating gondolas in the Venice Canal. Well, that's interesting. So I took it totally to the other extreme, Joey. You are just exaggerating. This is a supernatural force and it can do anything. I wouldn't be surprised if it turned into a bat and flew away to evade the police. I would not be surprised at all.
Yeah, I mean, open to interpretation. I guess we had very different ideas of what she was trying to describe here or who she was trying to describe. It felt like just a weird addition to the story.
Joey, just when you said that, don't look now, right? So we've been on alert. What is he supposed to be looking at? One of the twins says, my sister says that your dead daughter is warning you to get out of Venice. This is not a safe place for you to be in. And he was like, yeah, whatever. Right? No, really, I think you should listen to us. The wife has to leave, as you said, for this medical emergency for the son. So he is left in Venice. He could have gone with his wife. He could have done anything. He goes, no, it's too expensive. I don't want to leave the car here. He had all of these very practical, financial, and convenience matters that he was like fighting against. But they're like, we told you to leave. Then he gets in trouble with the police. That's the horror that's coming to him. He falsely accused someone, and now he's the person who actually is getting in trouble. This is a serious offense. Okay, so that's what your daughter was warning you against. He narrowly escapes getting arrested by the Italian police, and then he gets murdered. Well, his daughter was not wrong. Venice was not a safe place for him, but why was it not safe? What
Well,
was
there was
that
a
about?
serial killer on the loose and he got. What you were just saying made me think that's the suspense of this story that I think it does well. Because as we've been discussing with this phrase, don't look now, you're sort of trying to figure out, well, what does this mean in every context of the story? How does this apply? You are sort of waiting for the other shoe to drop for John, because as you said, you as the reader now have to decide, do you put merit into what one of the sisters said in this warning from their deceased child, or are you trying to be more logical like John believes himself to be? Are you team Laura or team John? I tend to be team John, where I'm like, no, this is not something that holds water, so I don't really care what they said. And it's ironic because, of course, as you were also talking about this, he's discrediting this woman for having this spiritual medium ability, and then he has his own ability and he doesn't really believe it. He doesn't believe what he is seeing from his own eyes.
I just love that you're going there because I'm laughing out loud. You can see that I'm just really enjoying the thought of the last part of the story because it was so funny to me. It's just like, are you kidding me? We started the story with them having this playful moment and we end with what I think is just a very memorable and funny scene. He saw the Vaporetto with Laura and the two sisters steaming down the Grand Canal, not today, not tomorrow, but the day after that, and he knew why they were together and for what sad purpose they had come. The creature was gibbering in its corner. The hammering and the voices and the barking dog grew fainter, and oh God, he thought, what a bloody, silly way to die. And I just love that so much. It's so British. Of all the ways I could have died, this is the most incredibly ridiculous that anyone could have thought of. And I was like, okay, Daphne, I see you. I saw that little wink you just gave us. I
I
get
see you,
it.
Daphne.
I see
Yeah.
you.
John is an interesting character, I think, because of course we have all this irony that's built in here, but I really enjoy that she sort of turned this trope of a hysterical woman and made it a hysterical man, because John's hysterical. He sees his wife and is like, call the police. I need everybody to search Venice. My wife is out here somewhere. He tracks down these sisters, goes to a restaurant they went to, and they're like, I have no idea where they came from. You think I just know everybody that comes around? So he is literally just hysterical, trying to figure out what's going on. And then he has to walk it back, and he doesn't even want to because he's embarrassed because he went code red. He went from 0 to 60 immediately without having anything concrete other than pretty sure he saw his wife, and I felt he kind of was convincing himself like, no, you did see it, John. You did. Like, he was trying to make sure that people couldn't gaslight him. And so I really like that dynamic if
It's
she was
like,
trying
I
to do
wouldn't
it.
make this up. Like, why would I make this up? Like, somebody has stolen my wife. She is not where she needs to be. And then when he finds out that he is really not in his right mind at that moment, he was like, oh man, now I'm in like serious trouble. I'm going to throw the sisters a bone by giving them our home address and our phone number so they can get in touch with my wife because this is important to my wife. I've really been a jerk in this situation. I really have overstepped and used my male privilege of, I'm American. I'm a man. You've got to believe me. And they're like, okay, but you're totally wrong. They have a whole bunch of witnesses that showed that these ladies never went anywhere near your wife.
Yeah. To continue with this idea of what does it mean for a man to be hysterical, especially at this time, because he is generally believed, even if they're sort of skeptical, they still continue looking and they feed into his hysteria. So I feel like if it was the other way around, if Laura is the one who's stuck in Venice and John is off to take care of their son, this would not have been how the story went.
He would have been shut down much earlier, but Joey, it was also the police captain was like, how many drinks did you have before you saw your wife doing that? Because we do see throughout the story that John's drinking, drinking, drinking. And even his wife said, are you kidding me? Are you drinking right now? And he's like, well, yeah, I just had a couple. And one time she went off with the sisters and he was like, well, my night's ruined. My wife is off, talking to these ladies. I'm just going to drink this entire bottle of wine. And I thought, what a great coping mechanism there, John. Way to man up. I was just so disappointed for him. And then at least one other person in the store, his wife called out his drinking. And then the police captain was like, a lot of interesting, unexplainable things happen after you've been drinking all day in
Are you
general.
drunk,
So
John?
did that happen? And he's like, well, that's beside the point, right? That was the thing. He's like, well, that's beside the point. I'm like, well, that's kind of actually the point. But it leaves that playful, open question. Is this his denial of his own experience of losing his daughter and his inability to connect with his wife in her grief? He just cannot see her point of view. It's like, no, you are just being really stupid and naive, thinking that these people can see the grief on your face. They know something's wrong. You probably said something in the bathroom about our daughter, and they can just con you because that's what they do. And then he sort of, as you said, he cons himself. He's like, no, I saw my wife. I know my wife. Are you telling me I don't know my wife? That's her jacket. How many people have that jacket? That is so my wife.
Yeah,
It's
no
like,
one could have that same color jacket, John.
no one else. No one else has a red jacket ever. It's not a thing. And then the fact that, and I love that the author put these little bits in here because it's like he's like, okay, I wronged the sisters, so I'm going to give them the phone number and the address of my wife, which they're going to need because my wife is going to have to come back and retrieve my dead body that I don't know yet, but it's going to happen. And you could see the like tick, 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 tick in his brain of like, oh, you got to be kidding me. This is not it. Because Joey, if you remember the very first time they saw the ambiguous twins, they didn't know, are you in disguise? And they're like, definitely murderers and possibly thieves. That is what they said. It's like, well, you did get murdered in the end, not because of them, because of your own inability to follow a directive of this is not a safe place for you. You might want to leave. Joey, the call is coming from the house. I'm just going to stick around because maybe it was like a wrong number or something. I'm like, oh my God, like the murderer told you they're going to murder you and you're just not interested in hearing it.
Yeah, you immediately leave. John is his own demise. I think this is similar to the monkey's paw because the father in that story is also the reason for the families. They don't all die, but their downfall. And we do have another exploration of grief of the loss of a child. This one in the monkey's paw is a little bit older, but still a child of someone. It's interesting that that is something that pops up because in the beginning I said, does horror have to evolve? Or are there things that are going to always be scary to us? And certainly, one of the most horrific things someone can go through if you're a parent is losing your child. And you were talking about this in the beginning of our Monkey Paw episode, saying why we're reading these specific stories. We're not reading for body horror or gore. We're reading because these are terrifying things that are universally terrifying. And so it's not a monster in the closet, it's the death of your child that ties these stories together, and it's even more horrifying than any monster that you can think of because that's the ultimate loss for a parent.
And Joey, I would love to now transition to where you started us with this. Do you want to read the passage or summarize what the doctor said to them as they lost their child, Christine, their little 5-year-old precious daughter?
It says, "She'll get over it," the doctor said. "They all get over it in time, and you have the boy." I know, John had said, but the girl meant everything. She always did, right from the start. I don't know why. I suppose it was the difference in age. A boy of school age and a tough one at that is someone in his own right. Not a baby of 5. Laura literally adored her. Johnny and I were nowhere. "Give her time," repeated the doctor. "Give her time. And anyway, you're both still young. There'll be others. Another daughter." So easy to talk. How replace the life of a loved lost child with a dream? He knew Laura too well. Another child, another girl, would have her own qualities, a separate identity. She might even induce hostility because of this very fact. A usurper in the cradle, in the cot that had been Christine's, a chubby flaxen replica of Johnny, not the little waxen dark-haired sprite that had gone. Gross to the doctor. Get out of here. No, you have no bedside manner, guy? Jeez. Disgusting. I don't really like what the doctor says, obviously, but I like that we have this very sort of tender moment with John because he is aware that this is like a huge loss. It's obviously his child as well, but he understands that Laura had this really deep connection with their daughter, Christine, and that this is not a possibility. You cannot replace a child with another child. And I like that he uses the word usurper in this because that's a very specific word. And we talk about word choices all the time. Oh, this was only written in English, so we don't have to guess what maybe the translation was. We reread a lot of translated works. She specifically uses usurper, and I think that's the best way to explain the emotional state. Now, I'm not a parent other than to my dog, who's right who's right here. But I'm sure I could imagine what it might feel like for someone to be in that situation and have someone say, "Well, you can have another one. They're like potato chips. You can't just have one. You could just replace them with another." And so I really love that she used the word usurper here because that is the best way to explain something in the most succinct way.
I agree with you, Joey. You can't just slot another being into a person's life and be like, this kid is just like the other kid. A kid is a kid. Like, what do you mean? Everyone has their unique perspective. What I did like is that John doesn't always lead with empathy, right? He doesn't always seem to really be in tune with what his wife may be thinking. And this was a very clear insight. No, we better not have another kid and we better not have another daughter because if we do, that child is going to suffer because the mom is not prepared to have just any old kid slotted in there. Her grief for her daughter does not get erased by how many other kids that she could possibly have. But I agree with you, Joey. That was just such a gross miscarriage of bedside manners. Oh, yeah, your kid's dead. Yeah, that's sad. Why don't you just go have some more? What? And I get that the 50s was a different time. Childhood mortality rates were probably higher than they are now. But still, I think one of the most insensitive things that you could say to a parent is, well, you're still young. You can still have more. It's like, but I can never have what was lost. So zip it. There's nothing you should be saying to me right now.
Yeah, I think if nothing else, we've talked about other merit of this story, but I think that especially right now in that time period for the author to write it in, that seems very progressive to me to put that on paper and have it published. Now, I'm not an expert. Okay, don't ask me if this is talked about a lot in this time and in this specific geographical location. But it feels very brave, I think, to see a woman, especially, talk about the devastation of losing a child and the reaction by doctors, specifically men, to just be like, well, just get over it. Walk it off. It's just one kid. You barely knew that. They were so young.
You
Yeah.
still have one. Don't be
Be
greedy.
grateful you still got one. What are you complaining about?
In the story, they get the phone call and they said, your son may need to have emergency surgery. And the mom's like, I'm going. He's like, no, it's not practical. It'll be fine. He's at boarding school. Someone will handle it. And the wife said something to the effect of, over my dead body, am I going to risk losing another child? Now, she's not a medical professional. She will not be able to jump in and save him through some heroic surgery. But she's like, I want to be by his bedside when he wakes up because the thought, the terror, as you said, the visceral feeling of impending loss. She's like, no, I'm not going to stay here for another minute. And the husband's like, well, what are you going to do with the car and like our luggage? And she's like, I do not care. I have one objective, and it is to reunite with my child when he's actually in need of me. And what was interesting is that she gets there too late. It was a happy ending too late, but she gets there too late. We had to push the surgery time up. So she got there after all the blood and gore was over. But it was also that relief that we had on her behalf of, okay, that's not the horror that's going to descend on my family right now. At least I am able to maintain that. And guess what? She's never going to have another child with John. You know why? He's dead now. Bye, John.
Now there's none. Yeah, I think that's also an interesting plot twist because we think the tragedy will be with their son, Johnny, and it's not. It's false idea.
Could it be a red herring like the red coat and the red goblin? Maybe,
Yeah,
maybe.
that's a good one. Yeah, that could be it. But it's effective because it keeps us guessing. And we're like, well, if it's not that, then there's obviously more story here, so something's gonna happen.
I love the sense of relief just for her of good. Okay, everything's fine. You're fine. The kid is fine. Everything is fine. Everything is fine. We're going to be okay. And I did have some empathy for the husband because he does not know how to comfort her, at least from what we've seen. He's not really dealing with his own grief in a productive way. He's like, I'll just drink a lot and not talk about our kid. Don't talk about her. This wound is not going to heal if you keep bringing it up. So let's just not talk about it." And she's like, "How can I not talk about it? This is my daughter and I care for her and these people say that they can see her." And Joey, when you were talking about like using logic, I was like, "John, I'm going to give you a big slap in just about a minute because he's trying to convince his wife why these twin sisters are shysters, right? He's like, they're definitely frauds. First, they can't see the dead. Second, our daughter is too young to be having dinner with us at 8 p.m. She would be in bed if this was real life." And I was like, dude, she's calling in from the other side of life. She doesn't have a bedtime, but I just love
Yeah,
that he was
probably.
logicking up. It's like not lawyering up, but he was like, no, because we wouldn't let our daughter have dinner with us at 8 p.m. in Venice because she would be in bed. Oh, really? This is your proof? Okay, John. Okay, John. So I also thought that was just kind of funny, but also relatable because he does not want to entertain the idea that there's a reality that exists, that departed people are communicating not with you directly, but through an intermediary. That is frightening, Joey. I don't want that. I don't want you to be like, oh, yeah, Frank just told me that your mom really is excited about this new development in your life. Pardon me? Please stay out of our supernatural stuff.
Yeah, say to my
I don't want
supernatural
it.
life.
I don't want that.
Well, I still think people should read this story, but just be cautious if there are things that are triggering to you, like the death of a child, some not so great stuff about little people and gender.
I am very curious that anyone who is listening to this, what team are they on? Do you get John's perspective? Are you with Laura? Are you glad he got it in the end? Did you think that was a shortcut? I'm just really curious about other people's reactions. I read this with a group of about 15 other people, and it seemed like everyone had their own unique take on, well, what was that about? What else did they need to know to be convinced? Was this otherworldly? Was this actually happening? Was this all a product of his imagination? Is he completely hallucinating? He thinks he's going to die. We don't even know he died. Yes, he got stabbed multiple times, but what if it's just like the son named Johnny, like little John. Johnny, he was going to die of an appendicitis attack, but magically he lived. So it's just that very interesting, ambiguous nature of the story. And we talk about this a lot. I love it when there's no quote unquote right answer.
Mhm.
Nobody is going to tell us what the story is actually about because it's for us to experience it on our own. And I think that is like life, thrilling and horrifying, and it's all the things.
Yeah, it really captures that. We don't know in the end. It's up to the reader to decide, do you think you have enough evidence to suggest that John dies or does he survive? We don't know.
We don't know. Joey, but one thing that I do know, we are going to read a story that I loved. I loved this story so much. The Night Cyclist by Stephen Graham Jones. And I am so looking forward to picking through that because I'm like, yes, this is a story that I can get behind. I'm really excited to see how he uses some of these supernatural elements to create some suspense and some really gross horror stuff. But we'll get
Yeah,
to that
maybe
next
we'll
week.
get a little gross with Stephen Graham Jones.
There's going to be some actual gross, visceral blood stuff going on, but it'll be great. So tune in. We'll see you
Part of
then.
horror.